Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a very timely discussion and it's going to focus on parental and child mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. As many of you know, it started last week with an announcement that schools were closing, children who are getting ready to go back to school, stayed home. And then earlier this week, we went into a total lockdown in Kigali. So looking at these restrictions, looking at communities, looking at families, looking at children, we are here to discuss mental health hygiene as well as other factors with our guests who are experts in this field. And with us, we have Laura Iyaga, who is the founder of Sana Initiative, as well as its global coordinator. Laura, great to have you on the square once again.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Julian Ingabire Kaiwanda, who is an early child development practitioner, advocate, as well as the founder of the Play Hub. Julian, great to have you on the square once again.
Thanks, Diana.
Great. My name is Dana Mpisi, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by the lovely Square resident panelist, Charlie Haber. Great to have you on The Square as always.
Same here, Dana. How are you?
Good.
A bit intimidated that I'm surrounded by four intelligent women.
And we also have with us Berna Namata, resident panelist of The Square. Great to have you on the show, Berna, as always.
Thank you, Dana.
As we always do before we kick off, we have midweek highlights that the resident panelists, share with the viewers and the panel, topics that have caught your attention. And Charles, is there something you'd like to share with the viewers?
Yeah, obviously one thing that we've always pledged to our viewers is, a COVID-related highlight. We've gone into our second round of a lockdown, and I pity law enforcement. It's very difficult to police COVID. And this is where you really need to give hats off to our police. Now, one of the most challenging things is that when it comes, first of all, in terms of giving credit where it's due, the government got a little bit of stick in terms of making announcements very late. So a few days ago, the announcement that schools would be closed came in fairly in advance. At least people had more than 1 day. Fast forward, cabinet resolutions came in and people were given a full day to prepare themselves for what they needed to do to go into the lockdown. So that is extremely impressive. But we are allowed to move around in our neighborhoods doing our exercise. So this evening when I was doing my run, I was observing a few things. And of course, people are moving. And then, I just ask myself how police says each time you move, you have to apply onto the movement clearance. I think there's an app, there's a whatever. And how do they sieve all these millions of applications, genuine or not genuine? At the same time, all these people who are allowed to move for one reason or another, you're going to the clinic, you're going to buy essential stuff, you trade in that essential stuff, motors are not working, public transport is not working, and there's all these essential activities that have been allowed to move on. The airport is open, the travel industry is open, hotels are open, but public transport is closed. So it's a huge dilemma. I think one of the biggest confusions that has happened to the world is COVID.
Yeah. True. Berna, highlights?
Vaccines. We haven't made so much progress as a continent around the vaccine, no matter what the politicians are saying. It's still quite difficult accessing them. And there's a lot of hypocrisy around it, especially by the West. Because on one hand, they have national targets in terms of vaccination. Some countries are openly saying by spring, they will have vaccinated almost everyone. And yet we have parts of the world where vaccination hasn't even started for frontline workers. So I don't know. Hopefully, because today I think there was a statement from the African medical suppliers. There's a coordination by the AU. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they will manage to navigate the politics around the vaccine, but I think vaccine nationalism is a big problem. And anybody thinking that the vaccine will be here soon, I think they should probably stop thinking about it and just keep the hand washing and get their masks and sanitize. Because, I mean, I've had people ask me, oh, so the vaccine is here? And I'm saying, no, there's no vaccine. And it probably won't be here till June or July, the earliest. So it's sad that the politicians kind of raised optimism around hot air, you know, and people have let the guard down just because they think the vaccine will be here. But even if it becomes available, it will just be a few doses for a few people. Yeah, so it still remains wash your hands, sanitize, wear the mask, yeah.
I think that on its own also warrants a discussion, a topic, you know, on its own. But thank you for your highlights, weekly highlights, Charles and Brenna. To our guests, thank you once again for joining us. We thought this is a timely discussion to have because people are generally stressed. And of course, these measures are to manage the pandemic in the country. Countries around the world are suffering the same issue, lockdowns, curfews, and that sort of thing. And as we enter into lockdown version 2.0, we thought it worth talking about mental health, especially in families, between parents and children. So like I said earlier on, this, you know, the last couple of weeks have been really eventful. The schools were closed. We had the announcement following the Monday cabinet meeting this week on lockdown in Kigali. So we have families that are anxious about COVID-19 infections or dealing with family members who actually even have it. We have children who are back at home, not at school. That on its own has an effect. We also have children and also mostly women being more exposed to abusive environments with this lockdown. And lastly, we just have general anxiety and stress. And we are here today to talk about mental health hygiene and also looking at how we can ensure the mental health also of parents and children. And I would like to start with you, Law, as a mental health expert and practitioner. What sort of conversation should we be having at the moment between parents, children, and communities during this stressful period when it comes to mental health?
Thank you, Diana. Like Charlie said, the biggest confusion the world is going through right now is this pandemic. And one of the things the pandemic is forcing us to do is to actually pause or stop. For example, we're now currently in a lockdown. And yet, as we're being asked to pause or stop, one of the things the main thing we are trained to do as we grow up is to actually work and do, you know. And it's difficult in itself as a pandemic, facing it, but it's mainly more difficult to sit and not be able to do, but rather sit with the thoughts and process everything that is happening as it is happening. And for the parents, not just the parents, but the adults in the communities who are the steward of the children and the kids at home and all people they take care of, I think one of the main things that we being asked to do as caretakers is to have empathy, to be kind to ourselves first. Because remember, the kids at home, the children that we take care of, feed from us, feed from our emotions, feed from everything that we do and who we are at large. And kids are confused among other people at home. And we have to also remember that as parents and as adults, children have a language they speak. Sometimes we just think that, you know, we'll send them to just go sit and be quiet and read your books and do this, but it's important to sit with them and remember that they also have emotions. And as much as they don't understand the language that we speak as adults, they understand, we know the language that they speak, or rather we can train to understand that language. And one thing is for sure, when we sit with the kids and explain to them and be like, hey, I understand that you miss being with your friends. I understand that you miss being at school. I understand that you want to see teacher so-and-so, you want to see your friends and so on. I also have those emotions. I also miss my friends. I also miss going to work because they also want to, sometimes they tap into that to understand, to see if we understand how they feel. Sometimes we are the adults in the room and they feel like all we can do is to give them orders. Yet when we sit with them and make them understand that we have the same emotions as the ones that they're facing, it's easy for them to grasp. And then maybe something else that we can do is to also say, okay, how about we make a deal? How about we set some activities, we schedule some things to do together? How about we, while mommy is working, while daddy is doing this and that, you can also be studying. I'm sure Julie will talk to us about, as a parent, about the issues that kids are facing at home. But the thing that we need to really tap into as adults and as parents is to, one, have empathy for ourselves so that we can be able to understand and be able to communicate and teach the kids at home. Number two, also be educated. It's also very, very important for us to look for different tools, different ways of understanding how to deal with kids in this particular pandemic. And the communications, the things we can discuss with the kids is very basic. Don't try to make the pandemic look like some sort of, how could I say this? Some sort of big deal, because a kid, if you explain it in a language that they understand, in terms of like, hey, remember when you're sick, when you have a flu, when you have a cold, this and this happened, this is how you feel, and when that happens, you don't go to school, and so on and so forth. It's easy to understand for the kids. However, it takes repetition. It takes courage. It takes that repetition that is very, very important to maintain for the kids.
Absolutely. Julie, you're an early child development practitioner, an advocate, as well as the founder of the Play Hub. So if you could just tell us, from your perspective, what sort of conversations do we need to be having around this time in families, especially between parents and children, when it comes to mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thanks, Diana. I think, first of all, what we need to understand during this period is that while, and this is according to the World Health Organization, while children are not really affected in terms of mortality by the pandemic as much as older people or adults, I think the lifetime impact is going to be so much on children, in the sense that their lives have been destabilized in so many ways. Schools have been closed. They do not have the time to socialize with their friends and their peers and within the community. We have issues of where children that come from different communities, and in this case, I think even the impact is a bit unequal. If you look at families that are living in poverty and people that are well-to-do, again, even that impact is going to be unequal at the end of the day, because you're looking at poverty levels where children are going to go back into child labor because of poverty levels. There's going to be a lot of malnourishment because they do not have access to the feeding that they usually have access to. Given that many of them actually do feed at school. You have children living with disabilities who actually thrive on going to centers where they have equipment and the ability to cater for their different special needs. And now they're at home and they cannot access these different opportunities to grow. So I think in terms of really children being affected by the pandemic, it's largely unequal. It's very global, and in terms of education or access to education, actually access to learning, because I keep saying, we keep talking about homeschooling, but for me, I now call it home crisis schooling, because it's no longer just homeschooling. The parents are in a crisis where they have to run their jobs, be able to take care of the kids. We've seen, even for the kids that are doing actually homeschooling, it's very, very, you know, it's a crisis. You know, you get on these different platforms of schooling, and kids are making noise in the background, parents are running around, and so it's really, we can't just say, just because people are being homeschooled, things are normal. You know, you have one community that is not accessing anything like schooling at all, and you have a community that is accessing schooling, but in a crisis. So I think it's really become, we are all trying to manage a crisis. Teachers are not equipped to make sure that they support, whether it's parents and kids at home. People do not have access to the internet. We didn't have the infrastructure in place to be able to really, even when you look at it in a global way, you have countries that have just, like Rwanda, that has just started, you know, schooling at home, and therefore they had to put everything possible in place to be able to reach as many children as possible. I think according to UNICEF, we have about 463 million children that have not accessed education as per October last year, 2020. So that poses a huge risk in terms of what is going to happen in the future. But I think not all is lost. I think actually there's also, on a positive side, there has been enthusiasm in terms of parents and teachers and kids being able to learn online, whether it is radio, whether it is TV, whether it is on WhatsApp or whatever other platforms that are available or that have been put in place by the different players and partners. But I think what is very, very important for all the key players in this situation is that we need to learn how to collaborate more. If you look at, and I keep saying it, if you look at the way Rwanda itself has pulled all its resources and all its sectors to collaborate to mitigate the impact of the pandemic, or at least to even fight the spread of the pandemic. I wish that collaboration, that level of collaboration could be extended to the education sector, to be honest. I think that would be amazing if we, as an education part of the sector, brings that kind of collaboration in place. I think there's a lot that can be achieved in the future.
I totally agree with you on your point on those efforts in collaboration, especially, you know, focusing them on our much needed education sector. Charles, what are some of your comments based on what we've heard from Julie and Law?
First of all, I think it's difficult to blame anyone. You know, it's doesn't help that our numbers have been rising. Doesn't help that our people are dying. It doesn't help that the people on life support are increasing. So, you know, there is that human side of thing. There is an extremely worrisome state in which the country is that we all have to appreciate. So that's on one side, and that should not be negated or belittled in any way whatsoever. That said, we did learn our lessons in the first phase of the lockdown and when schools resumed, and it's to Laura's point around preparedness. A few things. One of them that comes immediately to my mind is when I was sharing with fellow parents is that when the results, generally speaking, of the performance of the kids when they came back at the end of that term immediately after they had come back from school, that you find many of them had deteriorated because adjustment was a bit of a problem. So that's one. Now, we've gone back into getting them homeschooling. That confusion is a bit of a problem. I mean, today my daughter was asking me, okay, now I know how to navigate all this online schooling. I don't need your assistance. But does that mean that when this term ends, again, my grades are going to go down?
Wow.
Yeah. So, but we speak to the teachers as well. It's just one thing to say you have the necessary infrastructure that Julian is talking about. It could be internet. It could be, you know, one of the teachers was telling me that they are expected to go and sort of drive the classes or conduct the lessons from their schools. But they have no way of getting to their schools. Practically speaking, some of them do not live like within Kigali, so they have to commute from the secondary cities that are in the peripherals of Kigali, that creates another problem. Now, the conversation today is around mental health. All that builds. So the teacher who has struggled to get to class, the teacher whose salary is not being increased yet they have to pay extra in terms of transport or in terms of internet, or or probably they don't even have the tools to be able to effectively conduct their lessons. Online, their online classes. You can imagine how that builds onto the pressures. Yet, as a parent, this is somebody who is assisting me to deliver education to the child. So all these pressures, and my point that I want to conclude on is that all these pressures, it's a second time we're going into a lockdown. The conversation that schools should be having is how to prepare mentally for everyone who is affected from these pressures. It's not only about making sure that kids do not miss out on school time, but the pressures are building on everybody along the value chain, and I do not expect that teachers will be able to very effectively teach, yet they have all these pressures that are going on in their lives. Yeah,
for sure. Brenda?
I think we've talked about described the environment at home so much. But I feel that before we can even actually discuss the mental state of the children, we need to talk about the parents. Because the mental state of the parents will actually influence what they do with their children. Now, I think we haven't done enough, and we could do more around how to help parents actually help children.
That's true.
Yes. We really need an integrated approach that allows, first of all, flexibility with working hours. Because imagine if you're working from home and you're worried about a certain assignment or a Zoom meeting or whatever it is, a report, how are you going to be able to focus and pay attention to your child? It's extremely difficult. So for me, I feel that the beginning point should have been, if you're telling people work from home, introduce flexible working hours to take into account time for parenting. Because otherwise you have parents who are struggling, probably she will log on into the computer and then the child is there. And it's so hard, So in that kind of environment, it's really hard to imagine that you'll have parents dedicate time to their children, because they're also struggling with their own pressures. Sure. One, they're worried about their jobs, they don't know if they will keep them, So I feel that we could do more around innovative approaches, and it's been happening elsewhere around the world. Flexible working hours. As we speak, we simply shifted the office from wherever it is in the building and took it home, and it just doesn't work. We are used to home being home, a place where you go to relax, and now suddenly you've shifted the office. So what I would have expected is to say, okay, you're working from home, but we allow you some bit of flexibility and say maybe 6 hours, we'll give you a break maybe of 3, or, so that you don't feel guilty taking time off work to pay attention to your child. The other thing is, we continue to look at mental health, and again, it's becoming a buzzword, which is quite annoying. It shouldn't be looked at in an ad hoc manner, It is part of our day-to-day life. So if you're dealing with COVID, you have to think about how it affects the well-being of, whether it's in a family environment. Think about this way. I'll give an example. If you're saying we are shifting, it's home-based care for COVID patients. Yeah? Imagine a home with a patient or 2 patients isolating, and their children who are schooling, and there are those who are working. How does it work? So we kind of have to really think critically about how we solve our problems. Because sometimes I get a sense that we are probably just picking some Google documents and implementing stuff, without being practical about how is the real life situation in a home, So if you're isolating, someone is schooling, someone is working, what is the mental state in that home, And maybe somebody else has just lost their job. Let's be realistic, So for me, I feel that we could do better if we start thinking in practical terms. Look at an ordinary home, understand the needs. For instance, if we are saying the patient level in Kigali is maybe 5 out of 10, all these Midugudus have patients. So what are we doing to understand the needs of these homes? The same energy that we have had around telling people to stay home, can we actually also pay attention and make sure that if you have a patient, there's someone trying to check on you and actually finding out how you are? As we speak, again, RBC is overwhelmed, because typically what is happening now is you do a test and they say if the symptoms get worse, give us a call. Now, of course, there's stigma, so most people don't even make the call. So who else is there to actually help RBC, So I feel that we're at that point where we really need to change the approach and be more proactive and be hands-on, Stop just imagining things and thinking they can work in a typical home. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But Bana said something that has got me thinking. So 2020 was a very bad year. When we went into our first lockdown in April, after our first cases in February, businesses were closed, people lost their jobs, people's salaries were reduced, and so on and so forth. Fast forward, the situation is contained. We go back to some semi-normalcy, if I can say. Schools are reopened. Many parents borrowed, begged, and probably stole to take their kids back to school. Some were not able to take their kids back to school because schools had not been opened, especially public schools, for the infants, so kindergarten and the early primary age. Now, this parent, and this is just to play into Bernard's point, this parent who's gone through these pains, they've either lost their job or they've borrowed money or they've begged from whoever they could beg from, take the kid back to school, negotiate with the school on payment terms, they allow the kid in school when they've paid a quarter of the fees, and then the kid is there for a few days, and then the kid is out of school, and then the parent is back at home. Can you imagine how that pressure is building? And there was a video that went around, and this is Laura's space. There's a video that went around today of the mama who was arrested for wearing her mask wrongly, yet she had gone somewhere. She claims she had gone somewhere to get some water and buy food for her kids, and she's pissed. She's saying, law enforcement, I don't care what you think. Now, it is very easy because there's a voice in the background that's telling her that if you're in the wrong, just accept that you're in the wrong and then we deal with you. But she's got bigger problems. And that mama is a whole representation of society. And I think that's, Bana, thank you so much for bringing out that point. It's the same way we put in huge efforts to address trauma and trauma-related cases. I do not want to compare the genocide against the Tutsi with what's happening today. But the point I'm raising is we have initiatives. We have amazing homegrown solutions. We have, of course, we cannot necessarily convene, but we have ways in which we communicate. That if we can find ways in which we address these mental issues, and not, because all the effort absolutely is being put purely around policing, yet I think there's a huge pot of stress that is brewing when it blows up I don't.
We're in trouble.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I just want us to read a couple of tweets that are coming in from our viewers based on the topic before we go to solutions in terms of how can people cope. We're talking about nutrition, we're talking about mental hygiene, we're talking about fitness. So we've discussed, the environment that we're all living in right now. We're pointing out issues, but I want the conversation to move later on to just basically good coping mechanisms. The first tweet is from Naswiru Shema, who says that I would love for them to touch a bit on how taking care of our mental health could be a solution to long-lasting unity and reconciliation in Rwanda. How do we heal from transgenerational trauma? And how do we create safe spaces amongst us so that our peers will be safe to share? That's the first tweet coming in. We have a couple of more. The second tweet coming in is from Tuisenje Jackson, who asks that, nice topic, mental health is the key pillar of achievement. Without good mental health, there is no wealth. Parents need to be aware of mental health tips that can help them to be mentally fit and be able to support their children during COVID-19. That's a tweet coming in from Jackson. We have another tweet from Bernard, and Bernard is great to see we have champions of child mental health. We grew up at a time when beatings, both at home and school, were the norm, and we were expected to conform to a very narrow view of what a good child was. However, let's get these good ideas to trickle down to rural areas. We're going to have a couple of tweets coming in, but just very quickly before we go to, hearing from our guests on tips on good coping mechanisms with all these issues that we've pointed out, I would like to hear from you, Laure and Julian, if you have any comments based on what Charles and Brenna have just discussed. And I'll start with you, Laure.
Yeah, it's true that, like Brenna and Charles said, it's a difficult time. And like that mama who was struggling with peace and doesn't even want to understand and want to know what's happening out there, because the whole load of the pressure of this pandemic and everything they have to deal with at home is so much on them. I think one thing that we need to also appreciate is that one of the brain's function, if not the main function, is to protect us. When there's a time of firefighting, it understands that we are in firefighting mode. And mind tries to find all the tools that it can use for you to actually be able to stay afloat. And for some people, it's easy. For some people who are doers and rational, and not just rational, but who are able to compartmentalize, it's very easy for some people. But for some other people, it's difficult because this pandemic is not the only thing they're dealing with. It came when people had already other issues they were dealing with. Now, it's understandable that it can trigger all sorts of depressions, anxieties. That mama who's dealing with all that is definitely anxious of what's going to happen tomorrow. Definitely wondering how my kid is going to survive tomorrow. How am I going to find, what to feed them, and all that. But again, it's a uncertain and unprecedented time, and the mind also adjusts to that, and we just have to be also, learn to tune into the tools that we already have, because as adults, the more we grow up, the more we also have, we have a briefcase of tools that we usually use when we are in crisis mode. And it's also tuning in and wondering, okay, Laure, what is happening right now to me? How have I dealt with other crises before? Who else can help? Who can pitch in? How can I, maybe even just that moment of going to the room and closing yourself in and breathe for 1 minute, and maybe even allow yourself to feel and to be mad and to be grateful if you can be grateful, and find the strength to keep going, because in any case the pandemic is not ending right now. We still have a long way to go. Like Bernard said, the vaccines, even the little that is there is going to be people already fighting for it here and there. So and also Rwandans are we're resilient people. We've gone through things that are way more difficult. It doesn't make this easier, but we need to go back and remind ourselves, okay, I have a couple of tools that I can use. What can I do now? One day at a time, 1 hour at a time. How do I make sure that this hour, this day, at least I can sail through and think about tomorrow and prepare for tomorrow if I can, and how, in every with every possible effort that I can make, and with every strength and courage that I can find in myself.
Thank you very much. Julian, over to you. What are coping mechanisms that parents and families can deal with during this period? Adopting good mental health hygiene, looking at nutrition, looking at fitness, basically from your perspective as an early child development specialist.
Coming from an early childhood development space, it's actually, it becomes even more difficult, because you're talking about millions of children who haven't accessed school for the past 1 year. When you talk about homeschooling and when you talk about access to internet and those things, these are things that we're talking as people in this space right now. But when you look at the larger population in Rwanda, people haven't actually gone to school. Even those that were expecting to go to school last Monday were all of a sudden, closed down. We have this community of ECD practitioners, and everybody from parents to practitioners, everybody are saying, oh, my kids are screaming at home and all that. So when you think about it, it's really, it's quite a tough one. So when you link it with mental health, it affects the entire community. So like Bana was saying, it's from parent, it's to teacher, and it's to the child. So really, the mechanisms to cope with such a situation, sometimes you look at it and you're like, there's even nothing that can actually work for this parent in this space, because the parent has probably lost their job. The parent is probably not able to move around and be able to feed their kids. The parent, even before the pandemic, was working long distances to take their kids to school, or they were taking their kids to school because there's a feeding part of the program that actually sustains this homestead. So it's been really tough for many parents, and that automatically brings out the unhygiene part of mental well-being, and the physical part of well-being, because children are not socializing and they're not going to the playground, and they're not doing what kids do. They're not being children at all. So I think whatever we will prescribe for parents, or whatever parents have been doing, I'm sure each of us as a parent and community members have learned so many things along the way. But I know that there has been a lot of drive to ensure that, one, parents are really interacting with their children the best way that they can, give them information, be as truthful as they can be with their kids, and help them to understand the situation. That's one. I know sports and play is not really accepted right now, but within your confinement and within the best space that you have, run around with kids, talk to them, tell stories. I know Rwandan culture is famous for storytelling, play instruments with them, whatever is available. I remember when the first lockdown happened, there was a drive to distribute radios to communities for them to keep learning, for children to keep learning in the best way that they, whoever was providing them could. And one time I joked, I said, when you go to rural areas, a radio is a community property. Men sit around one radio and everybody's trying to listen to news, and you're also fighting for the kid to actually make sure that they are listening to some class that is going on. So when you think about such ways of living, that is actually difficult for children to learn. You think about single parents, what if a single parent is actually sick and they actually have a kid to take care of? What is going to happen to that parent? So you cannot have one integrated solution. But what we need to do, I think, as a community and as a country, is that we look at what is it that has worked for us. This has been a crisis. There's no one solution to it, but there's lessons that we've learned along the way. There are things that we know that can sustain us even in the next pandemic, because we don't know when the next pandemic is coming. But I think what needs to happen really is learn, collaborate, but as much as possible for kids, for our children's sake, and for our own sake as well, because we need the mental health before we actually transfer it to our children. We need to really be able to be open to our children, tell them what is going on, help them understand why they're not going to school, why they cannot actually go out and play with their fellow children, help them to actually utilize whatever is available in the community or in the household or in the surrounding to be able to engage themselves and engage them as much as possible, because kids really actually don't need so much to be able to be children. All we need to do is leverage whatever we have. And when I say whatever we have is, I'm not just talking about the city, I'm talking about mostly the rural area, because this is where the pandemic has really made such an impact in so many ways. And because of the poverty levels in different communities that we have, that is going to increase the classroom inequity that already existed. So I think parents need a lot of support from not just the government per se, but the community around, the surroundings. You have people like community health workers whose work actually gets challenged along the way because they cannot have movements to be able to support these families that they usually support. So I think parents need to be encouraged to really engage children as much as possible with whatever is available. And we shouldn't think that engaging children is as costly as many parents think. Whatever is available in the community, read books, whatever books is available. And I know that lots of initiatives that have been distributing as much learning materials as possible. But we can also make our own materials along the way to be able to engage our children. So I think parents need to be supported. And when we go back to school, that's now the biggest issue now becomes when schools open again. Charlie was talking about, the first wave of opening schools, and of course, public schools never did open. They opened for certain levels and not the others. But what support are we also providing for our teachers to be able to support our children? Because one, the teacher has always been there as a teacher, but we need to start reimagining who a teacher is. As parents, we've become teachers during the pandemic as well, something that we were not used to. But when these kids come back to school and the parents, and like we said, it's a circle of people being impacted along the way, what kind of support in terms of mental health and well-being are we providing for our teachers to be able to actually, reverse that to our children? Otherwise, we are doing nothing by sending back our kids to school, and yet the teachers have also gone through, that challenge of, salaries are low, there's no support, like Charlie was saying. What kind of support are we providing in terms of motivation, but also in terms of, health and mental well-being to be able to leverage and to regain what, we also have children actually that already had mental health issues. So we're going to have a relapse of such children going through the same, and now actually increasing that because of the situation that we're going in. So I think, again, for me, I really go back to the point of we need to learn lessons along the way and find the best way of collaborating with everybody from mental health experts to the private sector, to everyone on board, to be able to actually challenge and be able to combat the impact of the pandemic on the mental health well-being of children and the family. And the family.
Thank you very much, Julian. Just quickly back to our Twitter feed before I hear from Charles and Brenna. The first tweet is from Tuisenje Jackson, who says that positive discipline in parenting should be emphasized, especially during this period, that parents are spending more time with children than ever. Children need to spend time with their parents more than anything else. So are the parents mentally prepared? That's his first tweet. His other tweet is talking about more or less the same thing, and we'll get back to him. So we have a tweet coming in from Andrew, who says that with the lockdown having been a blessing in disguise, bringing most family members together away from the daily busy errands, most parents have further woken up to a real shock of reality and discovering reality within families. Some have gone wrong. Absolutely. So these are the issues. Thank you very much for putting them so eloquently to you, Julie, and to Law. Charles and Brenna, I would like to hear on your take from what our guests have said, and I'll start with you, Brenna.
To her point about collaboration, I feel that there's more room for collaboration, because what we've seen so far is that the government is taking the lead in everything. And yet we know the private sector, for instance, can do something. I'll give an example of telecoms, for instance. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't receive an SMS from telecom, every day.
On a daily basis.
Yes. Sometimes, yes, you want the message, sometimes you don't want it. So imagine if the telecoms dedicated a hotline to, one, if you have a mental health issue, you can speak to someone, or send out messages, frequently, for free. That could help, PSF, we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, they mobilized their members, they made some donations. Why can't we do that? Because all these things, the initiatives, cost money. So if we look at our children and look at our families, I think we can do more for them, beyond just providing food. The other element is the spiritual aspect. Before the pandemic, and I think to a larger extent even now, the church is still quite active, yeah? But we know that before the pandemic, people were donating so much money to the church, Where are these churches? What are they doing now? I know some of them have set up virtually. But spiritually, I think the church should be active at this point, giving people some bit of hope, They can do more for us. So I don't think that the church should also be what is the
Passive.
mode? Yeah, that they're also seated and waiting for the lockdown to end. When we know that many people, call their pastors every day, they talk to them all the time. But if the church could come together and actually start addressing some of these issues, especially in families, providing counseling, to couples, home, how to deal with children, we can find some solutions there. We can't just sit and expect...
going over and beyond what they usually...
Yes. We can't expect government to take the lead, in everything. The other thing I wanted to mention is that in spite of everything that is happening, I think the messaging has to change. Every time you tune in on television, news, the key message is always, there's enforcement, and then there's someone from RBC reminding you about washing your hands and people are dying. Yeah.
What would you like to see?
The messaging could also change and add the bit of the mental health on a regular basis.
Taking care of your mental health.
Yes, and also speak to the reality that, look, we know that this is difficult for you, but, you go through it, this is what you can do. Try to also package and integrate that as part of, because, I mean, you look at the messaging, it's alarming, and sometimes I think people lose hope because every time it's, you'll get arrested or you'll be punished or you're not, So I think we're at that point where the messaging around COVID also has to change and try to help people with real, give inspiration and solutions because people are spending more time at home and they're grappling with a lot. So there's room for that also.
For sure. Charles?
COVID is here to stay. And it's not about to go anywhere. Even after the numbers have been tamed, the after effects will be there for quite some time. So the rhetoric needs to change. The rhetoric needs to change and we prepare ourselves, as you're saying, Bana, for what is definitely going to hit us. Now, I will say this in Kinyarwanda and then I'll find a way of loosely translating it for Diana's sake. It's there's a saying about ushaga guchiri ndwara rairata. It's basically saying it refers to the fact that if you really want to get cured of something, you have to first accept that you have it. Now, I think the last time we had Laura on the show here, we were talking about how mental illness and accepting that you have a mental problem is a bit of a taboo. It's a big shame in the Rwandan culture.
That's true.
It's a big shame that even COVID is in the same space
of being stigmatized.
Of being stigmatized. Now, let us first accept that there are significant mental challenges that are coming with COVID. And that will be the first step in the right direction. In as long as we are still brushing it aside, and the image of COVID is a stern Afande Kavera who is telling you that, you know, he's in your face to just tell you things in one direction, as if COVID is purely and only about respecting the measures in place, we're missing a point.
What do you think should be added?
We need to accept that we have a huge mental problem that is already in the offing, and that even after we have addressed issues and the vaccine has come, the after effects will be extremely pricey to us from a mental perspective. And then once we accept that and we prepare for it, then it will be a lot easier to cross that path. I think that's you know, on the square here, we're really well known for giving very practical suggestions. Let us tackle it head on and probably challenge the likes. I mean, Julian told us that they have a forum, they have a platform for practitioners in the ECD space. I assume law, you guys have a forum in the mental, whatever.
Mental health space.
Mental medical space, let me call it that way for lack of a better word. Because it's disturbing. You look at the numbers that are coming in and you see that 1 out of every 4 Rwandese suffers from
traumatic stress.
Yes. From PSD. Yeah. You look at 1 out of 6 Rwandese that suffer from depression. Now, can you imagine what that is going to be post-COVID? It's going to be extremely alarming. So let us acknowledge that we have that problem, and once we acknowledge it's a problem, then that will be the first step in the right direction. Yes.
I totally agree.
Just very briefly, we tend to talk about the other things, and we're not talking about the frontline workers. I think you can imagine the mental health of the frontline workers who've been at it. It's coming to the second year, and there are people who've barely slept in their beds. You know, they've been at it, you know, long shifts, working hours, and these are the same people we expect that will still manage their homes, you know.
True.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe it is there, but we, for instance, need a scheme to help frontline workers. Just imagine somebody doing a shift that is endless.
Yeah. Let's just get to the last tweet for today before we get to closing remarks from our guests. And this tweet is from Cedric, who says, the best gift every parent should give his or her child is time. The issue of parental and child mental health will be solved by the time parents spend together with their children. I cannot agree with Cedric more. To you, Law, and to you, Julie, very briefly, your closing remarks on the future of mental health in Rwanda. One of the things I was asking myself, you know, in preparing for this show is that can COVID actually normalize the ability for Rwandans in our culture to be more open about mental health and have less stigma about it? Closing remarks, what do you envision for the future of mental health in this country? Law, very quickly, over to you.
Yeah, I think from what Charlie said, the most difficult part is going to be the post-COVID era. But we've already started having the conversations around mental health already. And once we get to a point where, like he said, we accept that mental health is a thing, that everything that we go through, plus this pandemic that is around us, is also going to affect us. It's going to quickly help us go through the next stage. Now, the next stage, what we see, or what rather I hope for in the future when it comes to mental health in the country is, I would say that we need to be careful, because if we're not addressing these issues as we go, and we need to really engage, and I like the fact that the government is also engaging the social health workers in the communities, but also all the grassroots initiatives to be really, like Julie said, collaborate, work together, and make sure that the population also understands that it is something that we can talk about. The same way you go to the hospital to be treated for malaria or a cold or any other disease. It's also okay to go out there and treat ourselves, get the help that we need for our mental health issues. One other thing that I would say is that the future is bright, and it's even brighter because now there's a tool that was built or worked on by the RBC, the Children Depression screening tool that is going to be used in all schools across the country. And once that is already in place and we're able to actually be able to screen how our children are feeling and their state of mind, see if they're depressed, to what level, and all that, it's going to be to inform how we also take care of them, which will make us take care of a future generation in a better place, in a better way.
Thank you very much, Lo. Julie, over to you. Closing remarks very briefly on what you envision for the future of mental health in Rwanda.
Thank you. One, I think, if I speak on behalf of the education sector, I think one is that we need to realize that we already had pre-existing education inequality or iniquities. And the pandemic has really widened the gap. But that's not, shouldn't make us hopeless. I think in addition to what Lo has just said, I think we also need to look at the mental health state as something that we can deal with on a daily basis. What activities, what engagements do we do or do we engage with in terms of engaging with parents and teachers and children to be able to, I mean, if you talk about children, really, it's very simple. Play with them, read to them, sing with them, and their mental health status will be okay. But most importantly, I think we need to look at it in a very much holistic way. How do we incorporate mental health curriculums in our existing curriculums? Because it has to be part of what we are learning and what we're teaching for it to be able to actually become part of the culture and people to really adopt it. So I think for us, again, the whole collaboration part, RBC, the ministry, the private sector, everybody needs to come on board, understand that this is something that we all need for children, for educators, for the parents to adopt, and therefore we all need to really adopt it in our curriculums, in our policies, for it to be able to work.
Thank you very much, Julie. We've come to the end of the show. Conversations like this, I always wish we had more time. I'd like to thank you, Charles. Love to thank you, Berna. And to our guests, Julie and Lo, thank you very much for really taking your time to, highlight the importance of mental health between parents and children and communities in general during this COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to thank our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, for always supporting The Square. To our viewers, keep the comments coming using hashtag The Square RW, as you can see in front of your screens. And to all of you who have tuned in, as always, thank you for watching. Have a good night and see you again next week. Thank you.